Wyoming, winter of 1889. The worst blizzard in a decade is swallowing the high plains whole. A Shoshone mother, clutching her newborn to her chest, stumbles through the storm with 4 young children trailing behind. No warm coats, no food, only fading hope. She's fled an abusive husband, choosing the freezing cold over one more night in hell. Then, out of the blinding white, a lone cowboy on horseback appears. Colt on his hip. Faithful German shepherd at his side. He looks her in the eye and says the words that will change everything. Come with me. Ain't nobody survives this storm alone. This is a true story of kindness in the frozen dark, forgiveness that doesn't come easy, and the miracle God sends right when his children need it most. Stay with me. You won't believe how it ends. Wyoming Territory, December 1889. The wind came down off the Bighorn Mountains like a living thing, sharp enough to shave the hide off a steer. Snow didn't fall so much as it attacked, sideways, hard, stinging any patch of skin foolish enough to show itself. The whole world had turned white and mean. Wyatt Storm Callahan, 35 and the last of his line, rode hunched in the saddle of his Appaloosa Thunder. A packhorse plodded behind on a lead rope, both animals crusted with ice. A battered colt peacemaker rode easy on his right hip, and a 5-year-old German shepherd named Scout sat up behind the cantle, thick black and tan coat fluffed against the cold, amber eyes cutting through the blowing snow like lanterns. Every few steps, Scout's ears twitched, listening for wolves, listening for trouble, listening for anything that didn't belong. Trouble found them first. Scout stiffened, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Wyatt reined in. The storm howled so loud most men wouldn't have heard it, but Wyatt trusted that dog with his life. He eased the lantern up. The weak yellow light clawed a few yards through the white and caught something moving, something human. A woman staggered out of the blur, a bundle clutched to her chest. Long, dark hair, once braided, now whipped wild by the wind. Deerskin coat torn at the shoulder, fringe frozen stiff. Behind her, 4 little girls stumbled in a ragged line, ages maybe 3 to 9, coats too thin, faces the color of ash. Their small boots barely left prints before the wind erased them. The woman stopped when the light hit her. Even half frozen, her chin came up proud. Shoshone blood, dark eyes sharp as a skinning knife. Her lips were blue, but they still shaped words Wyatt could barely hear over the gale. Keep riding, mister. Wyatt swung down, snow crunching under his boots. The wind snatched his Stetson clean off. He let it go. He took 2 steps toward her, slow, palms open the way you approach a spooked horse. Ma'am, he said, voice low but carrying. This storm's fixin' to kill every living thing dumb enough to stay outside. I got a cabin, fire, coffee thick enough to float a horseshoe. Come with me. She looked at the colt on his hip, then at his eyes, then at her children shaking so hard their teeth rattled like dice in a tin cup. Pride and terror fought across her face for one heartbeat. Then terror for her babies won. Wyatt didn't wait for more words. He scooped the 2 smallest girls up like they weighed nothing and set them on Thunder's broad rump. The third clung to her mama's leg. He lifted them both together. The woman, Ilara Dawnlight, he'd learn the name later, climbed up behind the saddle with the infant still pressed to her heart, arms trembling from cold and exhaustion. Scout dropped from the horse and took point, head low, plowing a path through knee-deep drifts, glancing back every few yards to be sure the strange new pack followed. Snow crusted his whiskers, but his tail gave one solid wag. Job accepted. Wyatt swung up into the saddle in front of Ilara, felt her arms circle his waist like a lifeline. He touched spurs to Thunder and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. Hold tight, ma'am. Ain't nobody dying on my watch tonight. Behind them, the storm screamed louder, trying to swallow their tracks. Ahead, through the white hell, Scout's black and tan shape moved steady as a compass needle pointing toward warmth, toward home. The blizzard had teeth, but it hadn't counted on a half-frozen cowboy, a shepherd dog that feared nothing on 4 legs or 2, and a mother who'd already decided the devil himself couldn't have her children. Not tonight. The cabin at Dead Horse Creek was nothing fancy. Just one big room of squared pine logs chinked with mud and moss, but it stood solid against the storm. The second Wyatt pushed the door shut, the howling dropped to a dull roar outside, and the heat from the potbelly stove wrapped around them like a living thing. He hung his iced-over coat on a peg, kicked the snow off his boots, and went straight to the stove. Coffee pot, beans, salt pork. Simple food, but it smelled like heaven after the frozen ride. Scout shook himself hard, sending ice crystals flying everywhere, then padded to the hearth and flopped down with a satisfied groan, eyes never leaving the newcomers. Elara eased down from the saddle just outside, legs shaking so bad she almost fell. Wyatt caught her elbow without thinking. She stiffened at the touch, then let him steady her. One by one he lifted the children down. The littlest ones were already asleep, heads lolling. The older two stared wide-eyed at everything. The crackling fire, the rows of canned goods on the shelf, the Winchester hanging over the door, and the big dog watching them like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact moment. Inside, the air was thick with pine smoke and coffee. Wyatt set the kids on the bearskin rug in front of the stove. Elara peeled off wet moccasins and tiny boots, rubbing little blue feet between her hands until color came back. She kept the baby tucked inside her coat, close to her heartbeat. Wyatt didn't crowd them. He just moved quiet and sure. More blankets from the chest, a tin cup of warm milk and molasses for the kids, a thick slice of soda bread each. When the children finally curled up like puppies and slept, Elara sat on the bench by the fire, long dark hair steaming as it dried, the beaded necklace at her throat catching the flames. Only then did she speak. Her voice was low, rough from cold, and crying she hadn't let fall outside. My father, many eagles, disappeared in a storm like this 10 winters ago, went looking for stray horses and never came home. After that, my mother traded me to Harlan Crow for 3 ponies and a promise of protection. Harlan was handsome once, good with a rope, but the bottle turned him mean, and every girl I bore him made it worse. Tonight he passed out drunk. I took the children and walked into the storm because staying felt colder than dying. She looked at the sleeping faces, then at Wyatt. I figured the snow might kill us kinder than he would. Wyatt poured coffee into a tin cup, black and strong enough to wake the dead, and set it in her hands. Steam curled up between them. This country don't care where you came from, he said. Only thing it asks is whether you're still breathing tomorrow morning. You and those youngins are breathing tonight. That's enough for now. Scout scooted closer to Elara, rested his big head on her knee, and let out a long, warm sigh. She laid a trembling hand on his thick fur, fingers sinking in like she was testing if the dog, the fire, the whole cabin might be a dream. It wasn't. Outside, the wind kept trying to tear the roof off. Inside, 5 children and 1 exhausted woman slept under a stranger's roof for the first time, without fear of a fist or belt. And for the first time in years, Wyatt Storm Callahan didn't latch the door when he turned in. Some storms, he figured, you don't keep out. You just make sure there is room by the fire when they blow through. The storm finally wore itself out sometime before dawn. When Wyatt stepped outside to check the stock, the world was quiet, except for the soft creak of snow settling. The sky had cleared to a pale, cold blue, and the sun hung low and weak, throwing long shadows across the drifts. Inside, Elara was already up. She moved quiet as a deer, folding blankets, sweeping the packed dirt floor with a bundle of sagebrush. The children still slept in a warm pile by the stove, cheeks pink again, breathing easy. Scout lay sprawled among them like a big black and tan bear rug, one eye half open, keeping watch even in his sleep. Wyatt came back in with an armload of firewood and stomped the snow off his boots. Elara was on her knees by the old cedar chest in the corner, the one he hadn't opened in years. The lid stood open. She had something in her hands, held gentle like it might break. It was a quilt. Hand-woven wool, deep indigo with white thunderbirds and jagged lightning lines running corner to corner. The edges were frayed from use and time, but the colors still held strong. Elara's fingers traced the pattern like she was reading Braille. Her face had gone still, the way fresh snow looks right before it slides off a roof. Wyatt knew what was coming. He set the firewood down slow and easy. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. Snow melted off his coat and dripped onto the floorboards. 10 years ago, he said, I was riding fence in a blow just like last night. Horse spooked, went over the edge into a ravine. I was pinned, leg broke, half buried in snow. Thought that was it. He swallowed. The words came hard, like pulling nails. A man came out of the storm, Shoshone, tall, long braid, eyes kind even in that cold. Didn't say much, Just wrapped me in that quilt to stop the shaking, dug me out with his bare hands, got me up the bank. Then the shelf above us let go. Whole wall of snow came down. When I dug out, he was gone. Only thing left was the quilt. The cabin was so quiet Wyatt could hear the stove ticking as it cooled. Alara's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She pressed the quilt to her cheek, breathing in the faint smell of sage and wood smoke that still clung to it after all these years. "My father," she said simply. Wyatt nodded once. The guilt he'd carried a decade hit him fresh, heavy as a saddle on sore shoulders. "I never went to your people. Told myself it wasn't my place. Truth is, I was ashamed. A man died saving my worthless hide, and I didn't even know his name till now." Alara stood up slow, clutching the quilt like a baby. For a long moment, she just looked at him, looked through him, really. Then she turned, woke the children gentle, bundled them into their still damp coats. Wyatt didn't try to stop her. He knew better. They stepped out into the bright, bitter morning. Snow came to the knees in true places. Alara walked maybe 50 yards toward the open plain, the children trailing behind like ducklings. The wind had died, but the cold still bit hard. Wyatt stayed on the porch, hands in his pockets, heart somewhere down around his boots. Scout whined and pressed against his leg, confused why the new pack was leaving. 10 minutes, maybe 15, long enough for little feet to get numb. Then Alara stopped. She looked back at the cabin, smoke curling steady from the chimney, horses nickering in the corral, a big dog pacing the porch like he couldn't decide whether to follow or stay. She looked down at her children. The baby was fussing, face red from cold. The older girls hugged themselves, shivering. Alara turned around and started back. When she reached the porch, she met Wyatt's eyes. "I ain't forgiven you," she said, voice raw but steady. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But these children need fire more than they need my pride right now." Wyatt stepped aside and held the door open. "That's fair," he said. She walked past him into the warmth. The children tumbled in after her, already peeling off coats and heading for the stove like it was an old friend. Scout greeted them with a full-body wag, tail thumping the wall. He nosed each child once, then looked up at Alara as if to say, "Good choice." Wyatt latched the door behind them, quiet and careful. Some debts take longer than a lifetime to settle, but for now, the fire was burning, the coffee was hot, and nobody was walking back into the cold, not today. 10 days passed in a kind of quiet rhythm. The snow stayed deep, but the worst of the storms had blown through. Wyatt chopped wood each morning, the axe ringing steady against the cold. Alara cooked simple meals, beans, cornbread, venison stew, and taught the children to help without making much noise. They were learning the cabin's rules: speak soft, move careful, trust slow. Scout took to the kids like he'd been born for it. He let the little ones climb all over him, herded them away from the stove when they got too close, and slept across the doorway every night like a living barricade. Then one afternoon the wind shifted, carrying the faint jingle of bridle chains and the crunch of many hooves on crusted snow. Wyatt was out back splitting kindling when Scout's head snapped up, ears flat, a low growl building in his throat. Wyatt dropped the axe and stepped around the corner of the cabin. 4 riders were coming up the trail. The lead horse was a big black gelding, and the man on it sat tall and mean. Broad shoulders, long dark hair, loose under a battered hat, face red from whiskey and anger. Harlan Crow. Behind him rode 3 hard cases, rifles across their pommels. Bringing up the rear, looking none too happy about it, was Sheriff Elias Reed, gray mustache frosted white, badge pinned to a sheepskin coat. Harlan reined in 20 yards out and yelled loud enough to rattle the icicles off the eaves. "Alara, get out here, woman. You've had your fun. Bring my kids and get on this horse." Inside, the children froze. The baby started crying. Alara's face went tight, but she didn't flinch. She picked up the infant, settled the others behind her skirts, and stepped to the door. Wyatt was already on the porch, coat open, right hand resting easy near the butt of his Colt. Scout planted himself at Wyatt's side, lips peeled back just enough to show fang, a steady rumble rolling out of him like distant thunder. Harlan's eyes narrowed when he saw Wyatt. "Who the hell are you?" "Owner of this spread," Wyatt said calm, "and right now, guardian of everybody on it. State your business civil, or ride on." Harlan laughed, ugly and short. "My wife and my kids are my business. Sheriff here's just along to make sure I get what's mine." Sheriff Reed cleared his throat and spat to the side. I'm here because you said she might be in trouble. Crow, don't look like trouble to me. Looks like folks keeping warm. Harlan ignored him, eyes fixed on Alara. You think you can steal my family and shack up with some drifter? Get out here now or I'll drag you. Alara stepped forward onto the porch, chin high. I'm not going back, Harlan. Not ever. The children peeked from behind her. When they saw their father, the older two shrank closer to her legs. That told the story plain enough. Reed's gaze lingered on the faint yellow bruises still showing on Alara's wrists. He took a slow breath. Crow, he said, voice flat, I'm opening a file on domestic abuse. You come around here again without my say-so, and I'll arrest you myself. Now, turn those horses and ride out. Harlan's face twisted. He started to spur forward, hand dropping toward his holster. Scout lunged one step, teeth flashing, a snarl that cut the cold like a blade. Wyatt didn't move, but his voice dropped to winter steel. Touch that iron, Harlan, and you won't leave this yard breathing. The three hired men suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. Harlan froze, hate boiling in his eyes, but the odds had shifted. Even a drunk knows when the room's turned against him. This ain't over, he spat. You hear me, woman? Ain't over. He yanked his horse around hard enough to make it stumble, then kicked it into a lope. The others followed, snow flying from hooves. Sheriff Reed lingered a moment. He tipped his hat to Alara. Ma'am, you need anything at all. You send word to Casper. I'll come. Then he too rode off, slower, leaving only the fading echo of hooves and the wind. Wyatt watched till the last rider vanished over the rise. Scout's growl faded to a grumble, then silence. Alara let out a breath she'd been holding for days. The children clung to her. Wyatt turned to her, voice softer now. He'll be back, he said. Men like that always test the fence twice. She met his eyes, steady. Then we'll be ready. Wyatt nodded once. Inside, the stove still burned warm. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and deep. Some fights you win with a gun. Some you win by simply refusing to open the door to the devil when he comes knocking. For now, the door stayed shut, the fire stayed lit, and the big German shepherd kept watch. That was enough. The ride into Casper took most of a gray winter morning. Wyatt hitched the team to the sled, piled in straw and blankets, and they set off across the crusted snow. Alara sat up front beside him, the baby bundled warm against her chest. The other children nestled in the back, quiet but wide-eyed, like young colts on their first trip away from the corral. Scout rode in the bed too, head high over the side, ears pricked forward, watching the trail ahead and behind. Casper wasn't much of a town yet, just a scatter of log buildings and false fronts along the North Platte, smoke rising straight in the still, cold air. The courthouse was a sturdy two-story affair of whipsawed pine, with a potbelly stove inside that made the place smell of coffee, tobacco, and wet wool. Judge Clara Voss ran her courtroom like a well-kept ranch. No nonsense, no wasted motion. She was a small woman, with iron-gray hair pinned tight, and eyes that had seen every kind of trouble the frontier could throw. Folks said she'd once stared down a lynch mob with nothing but a Henry rifle and a sharper tongue. When Harlan Crow strode in, boots thudding on the plank floor, the room went quieter than fresh snow. He'd cleaned up some, shaved, hair tied back, but the sour smell of last night's whiskey still clung to him. His three hired men loitered outside. The judge had made it clear only parties to the case came through the door. Alara took the stand first. She wore her best dress, dark wool with a simple beaded collar her mother had sent years ago. Her voice didn't shake once. She told it plain. The good days at the beginning, the slow turning after each daughter was born, the first slap, the first broken rib, the night she finally decided the storm was safer than the man sleeping beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The bruises had faded, but the truth hadn't. Sheriff Reed testified next. He stood easy, thumbs hooked in his belt, and laid out what he'd seen at the ranch. Frightened children, marks on Alara's arms, the way Harlan had come riding in looking for a fight. He finished with a slow nod toward Wyatt. That cowboy there gave him shelter. Didn't ask for nothing in return. Did what any decent man would. Wyatt stayed seated in the back row, hat on his knee. Scout lay at his feet, calm as Sunday, though his ears flicked every time Harlan shifted in his chair. Harlan got his turn. He stood red-faced, voice rising and falling between bluster and self-pity. Claimed Alara had run off without cause, that the children were his by right, that no court had business meddling in a man's family. Judge Voss listened without expression. When Harlan finally ran out of wind, she leaned forward on the bench. "Mr. Crow," she said, voice cutting clean through the room, "I've heard enough. This territory may be wild, but it's got laws. One of them says no man gets to beat his wife and children and call it discipline." She picked up her gavel. Marriage dissolved, full custody to the mother, restraining order issued. Harlan Crow is forbidden to come within 10 miles of Alara Dawnlight or any of her children. Violate that, and you'll spend the rest of your days breaking rock at the territorial prison. The gavel came down sharp as a rifle shot. Harlan surged to his feet, face purple, hand stabbing toward his holster. The room tensed. 2 deputies stepped forward quick. Wyatt was already halfway down the aisle, Colt drawn smooth and steady, hammer back with a click that carried in the sudden hush. "Easy, Harlan," Wyatt said, quiet but clear. "Court's spoken. Day's over." Harlan stared down the barrel for a long 3 seconds. Something in Wyatt's eyes, cold, certain, unafraid, made him think better. He let his hand drop, spat on the floor, and shoved past the deputies out the door. The room let out its breath. Judge Voss looked at Alara. "You're free to go, Mrs. Dawnlight, and you're safe. This court will see to it." Alara stood, gathered the baby close, and managed a small nod. Her knees felt like water, but she walked steady down the aisle. The children met her at the back, faces bright with something they hadn't felt in years, relief. Outside on the courthouse steps, the winter sun was trying its best to warm the air. Sheriff Reed tipped his hat. "Wind's shifting south," he said. "Might get a chinook soon. Snow will start melting." Alara looked up at the pale sky, then at Wyatt waiting by the sled, Scout sitting patient beside him. "Thank you," she said to the sheriff, to the judge visible through the window, to the whole wide territory that had finally listened. Wyatt handed her up into the sled, tucked a blanket around the children. On the ride home, the oldest girl, Lila, leaned over the seat. "Are we really going back to the cabin, Mama?" Alara met Wyatt's glance. He gave the slightest nod. "Yes, darling," she said. "We're going home." The runners hissed over the snow, smooth and sure. Behind them, Casper faded into the white distance. Ahead lay the ranch, the fire, the big dog waiting to greet them. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the trail felt like it was leading somewhere good. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, teasing the land with warm afternoons followed by hard freezes that turned the mud to iron overnight. But, bit by bit, the snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes, revealing patches of tough green grass and the first brave shoots of wild onion. Wyatt worked from dawn to dusk. He added a second room onto the cabin, logs he felled himself, notched and fitted tight, roofed with fresh-cut shakes. The sound of his axe and hammer became as steady as a heartbeat. When the walls were up, he built bunks for the children, a real table big enough for all of them, and shelves where Alara could keep her herbs and beaded work. Alara took to the land like she'd been waiting her whole life to put her hands in honest dirt. She planted a small garden near the creek, sage, wild plum starts, and the tiny blue flowers the Shoshone call sky drops. Every morning she walked to the fence line with the baby on her hip, checking for breaks, singing low songs in her own language that made the horses lift their heads and listen. The children grew bolder with the warming days. Lila, the oldest at 9, shadowed Wyatt everywhere. She learned to throw a loop over a fence post, to clean and oil a rifle, to read the sky for weather the way some folks read a newspaper. The younger ones followed Scout like a pack of noisy cubs. He tolerated their tugs on his ears and tails with patient dignity, herding them gently away from the creek when the water ran high. Evenings were the best part. They ate around the new table, venison or rabbit Wyatt brought in, cornbread Alara baked in the Dutch oven, wild greens she gathered. After supper, Wyatt would pull out his old guitar, the one with the cracked soundboard that still rang true. He played slow trail songs about lost loves and open ranges, his rough voice carrying soft into the night. Alara would sit across the fire, mending or beating, and sometimes add a Shoshone lullaby that wove around his chords like smoke. The children fell asleep to the music, heads pillowed on Scout's broad back. One warm evening in late May, Wyatt came in from the corral carrying a surprise, a half-grown mongrel pup he'd found abandoned on the trail, ribs showing but eyes bright. He set it down in front of the youngest girl, who squealed and named it Snowball on the Spot. Scout sniffed the newcomer once, decided it wasn't a threat, and promptly began teaching it manners with gentle nips and patient herding. Alara watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a small smile playing at her mouth. "You're making this place feel permanent," she said. Wyatt shrugged, but his eyes were soft. "Figured it was time. Land's been empty too long, needs laughter in it." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the sage on her hands. "The children laugh now," she said quietly. "They sleep without jumping at every sound. That's more than I ever thought to ask for." Wyatt looked down, at her, then out at the corral where Thunder grazed beside a gentle mare he'd bought for the older kids to learn on. Scout trotted past with the pup tumbling after him, the children chasing both. "Reckon we're building something solid," he said. "Takes time, takes work, but it holds." Alara nodded, resting her hand on his arm for just a moment. Light, but real. Outside, the last light of day painted the hills gold and rose. The creek ran clear and noisy over the stones. A meadowlark called from the fence post. Winter had tried its best to kill them all, but spring had come anyway, and with it, the slow, stubborn business of healing. The cabin wasn't just shelter anymore. It was starting to feel like home. By the time the lupines bloomed purple across the valleys, the ranch felt almost too small for all the life it held. The new room was finished, the garden rose straight and green, and the children ran wild from dawn to dark, barefoot, laughing, chasing Scout and the pup through meadows loud with grasshoppers. One evening after supper, Alara set a small bundle wrapped in deer hide on the table. "We need to go back," she said quietly, "to Wind River. My mother deserves to know her grandchildren are safe, and she deserves to hear the truth about my father from the man who was there." Wyatt looked at the bundle, the Thunderbird quilt, carefully folded, and nodded without hesitation. "Been waiting for you to say that. We'll leave at first light." They loaded the wagon with gifts, coffee, sugar, a bolt of calico cloth, jars of Alara's wild plum jam, and a new knife Wyatt had traded for in Casper. Scout rode in the back with the children, ears flopping as the wheels jolted over ruts. The baby slept in Alara's arms, and Lila sat up front between them, proud as a princess on her first long ride. The reservation lay 2 days west, across rolling sage and red rock ridges. They camped one night under cottonwoods by a creek, fire crackling while Wyatt played soft tunes on his guitar, and Alara told the children stories of their grandfather, how he could track a lost pony for days, how his laugh sounded like summer thunder. When they rolled into the cluster of lodges at Wind River, heads turned, children ran alongside the wagon, dogs barked, and old men shaded their eyes to see who was coming. Lydia, many eagles waited on the steps of the big ceremonial lodge, straight-backed and proud despite her years. Silver streaked her long braids, and her face carried the same strong lines as her daughter's. When Alara stepped down, the two women stood frozen for a heartbeat, then fell into each other's arms. The grandchildren tumbled out, shy at first, until their grandmother knelt and opened her arms wide. They went to her like birds to familiar ground. Lydia's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found Wyatt standing quiet by the wagon. "So," she said in English, "you are the one." Wyatt removed his hat. "Yes, ma'am." She led him inside the lodge, away from curious eyes. The air smelled of sweetgrass and burning sage. Alara followed with the baby. They sat in a circle on woven mats. Scout lay across the doorway, head on his paws, content to guard. Wyatt placed the Thunderbird quilt in Lydia's hands. "This belonged to your husband," he began, voice low and steady. 10 winters ago, he saved my life with it, and with his own strength. I never got the chance to thank him, and I never found the courage to bring it back until now." He told the story plain. The ravine, the stranger appearing through the storm, the warmth of the quilt, the desperate pull to safety, the roar of the avalanche that took many eagles away. When he finished, silence filled the lodge like deep water. Lydia ran her fingers over the woven thunderbirds, eyes shining but dry. "My husband died as a warrior should, protecting life. He would want no blame carried for that. The quilt came back to us. So did his blood." She looked at the children clustered outside the door, then at Alara's face, softer now than it had been in years. "And so did my daughter, whole." She placed a hand on Wyatt's arm. "You have brought honor where there could have been only sorrow. You are welcome at our fire." That night, the lodge filled with people. Drums sounded low and steady. Old songs rose into the star-thick sky. Alara stood in a new dress of soft doeskin, beaded with the lightning pattern. Wyatt had traded his trail-worn clothes for a clean buckskin shirt. When the elders asked what the white cowboy intended, Wyatt spoke clear and simple. "I intend to stand beside your daughter and raise these children safe, to work the land honest, to keep the fire burning for all of them, every winter that comes." Lydia smiled then, the first full smile anyone had seen from her in years. She brought out the star quilt, huge, radiant with colors of sunrise and storm, and draped it over Wyatt and Alara's shoulders together. "Then the circle is complete," she said. The people sang the song of the thunderbird, voices weaving with the drum like wind through pine. Children danced. Scout, with a hawk feather tied to his collar, trotted proud around the fire ring, earning laughs and bits of fry bread. Later, under a sky bright with stars, Wyatt and Alara stood apart from the crowd. He slipped a silver ring onto her finger, simple band etched with a tiny lightning line. "I ain't much for pretty words," he said, "but I'll spend every day making sure no storm ever touches you or these young'uns again without me standing in its way." Alara looked up at him, eyes reflecting the firelight. "You already have." Behind them, the drums faded into the night, and the Wind River people welcomed the new family into the long story of their blood. Some journeys start in snow and sorrow. This one had found its way home. The following winter came early and hard, snow piling high against the cabin walls and the wind finding every crack to whistle through. But inside Dead Horse Creek Ranch, things were different now. The cabin had grown, 2 sturdy rooms, a loft for the older children, windows Wyatt had traded for in Casper that let in pale winter light. Smoke rose straight and thick from the chimney, carrying the smell of pine and frying venison for miles across the white plains. The corral held more horses, the barn a milk cow, and a pen of chickens. The place looked lived in, loved in, fought for. Wyatt and Alara stood on the wide porch one late December afternoon, watching the children play in the snow. Lila, now 10 and tall for her age, had roped a stump and was teaching her little brother, born the previous spring, a sturdy boy with his father's dark eyes, how to throw a loop. The older girls built a lopsided snow fort, while the younger ones tumbled with Scout and Snowball, the pup now half-grown and all legs. Scout moved among them like a black and tan guardian, patient as ever, nudging the smallest back to safety when they strayed too far. Alara leaned against the porch rail, one hand resting on the slight swell beneath her apron, another child on the way, come summer. Wyatt's arm circled her shoulders, easy and natural, like it had always belonged there. "Remember last winter?" she asked softly, breath fogging in the cold. Wyatt huffed a quiet laugh. "Hard to forget. Thought this spread was just a place to wait out the years alone. Snow up to the eaves, wind howling like it wanted in to finish me off." He looked out at the chaos of children and dogs, the tracks crisscrossing the yard like a map of pure joy. "Now look at it," he said, "full of noise and mess and life." Alara turned to him, eyes shining. "You gave us a home, Wyatt Callahan. More than that, you gave us a future." He shook his head, humble as always. "We built it together, you, me, the young'uns, even this old dog." Scout heard his name and trotted up the steps. Snow clumped on his whiskers. He pressed his big head against Wyatt's leg, then Alara's, tail thumping steady against the boards. Snowball followed, yipping and nipping at Scout's heels until the big shepherd play-bowed and sent the pup tumbling. Inside, the stove crackled, coffee simmered, and cornbread baked. The Thunderbird quilt hung folded over the back of the rocking chair by the fire, clean now, repaired in places, a part of the family instead of a ghost in a chest. Wyatt pulled Alara closer. "Reckon your father's watching," he said. "Wherever good men go when the snow takes 'em." She nodded against his shoulder. "He'd like this. He always said the land rewards those who keep the fire burning for others." The sun dipped low, painting the snow rose and gold. The children's laughter rang out sharp and clear, carried on the cold air like bells. Wyatt rested his chin on her hair. "Thought the West had taken everything from me," he murmured. "Turns out it was just waiting to give something better." Alara smiled, warm as summer in the middle of winter. "No winter lasts forever," she said, "when a cowboy and a warrior woman decide to ride the same trail." Scout barked once, deep and satisfied, as if agreeing with the whole wide world. Under a Wyoming sky heavy with stars and promise, the little ranch at Dead Horse Creek stood strong, smoke rising, dogs guarding, children growing, and two hearts that had once been broken, now beating steady together. Some storms come to bury you, others come to wash the trail clean so you can find your way home. This one had done both. And in the end, the fire won. Some folks say miracles come with thunder and lightning, or angels breaking through the clouds, or signs written bold across the sky. But sometimes a miracle looks like a half-frozen cowboy stopping on a lonely trail in the middle of a killing storm. Sometimes it looks like a brave mother clutching her babies, refusing to give up even when the wind itself seems to say she should. And sometimes it looks like two broken hearts finding each other, right when God decides they've carried their burdens long enough. Maybe that's the real lesson of this story. We don't always understand why the storms come, why good people are taken, why the road turns cruel, and the nights grow so cold we can barely feel our own hearts beating. But in His perfect time, God places the right souls in our path, a stranger with an open door, a faithful dog, a hand reaching through the snow. If you're watching this tonight and life feels colder than a Wyoming winter, if the weight on your shoulders seems too heavy and the trail ahead too dark, hold on just a little longer. Redemption doesn't always ride in with trumpets. Sometimes it comes quiet, on tired horses, wearing an old coat and carrying nothing but kindness and a warm fire. Your storm won't last forever. Help is closer than you think. Someone, somewhere, is being sent your way. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us which part spoke to you most. And if you want more stories of hope, healing, and second chances, hit that subscribe button and join the family. May God bless you, keep you warm through every storm, and remind you, in His perfect timing, that none of us were ever meant to walk this life alone. Amen.